I sure will. So, welcome everybody. So glad everybody can join us today. We're going to have an exciting panel. We're going to talk about the economics of distribution models and like how to choose the right distributor for your business. We have some great presenters today. We'll have Jonathan from Milo's, and we will have Maddie from What Chefs Want, and then Adam Pendleton from Appalachian Sustainable Development. Super excited to hear what everyone has to say, and make sure that you use the Q&A for any questions you have, and we'll make sure that we monitor that. So let's see, shall we get started with Jonathan? Would you like to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Jonathan Milo Leal. I own Milo's Whole World Gourmet. We have a brand called Brownwood Farms, and we're also a co-packer. About 2.5 years ago, I built a new plant in the Nelsonville warehouse, the Nelsonville campus of AceNet, and have been in business 23 years. Started a million years ago with Leslie way back when, and other folks, and have grown and survived amazingly all this time. This is a very, yeah, exactly. This is a business of survivors. It's a very difficult business to grow in, depending on the scale that you want to get to, obviously. So I know the focus is going to be on distribution, and I could talk for hours about distributors in positive and other ways. I love What Chefs Want for what it's worth. So there won't be any negative comments here about that, but I'm happy to answer any specific questions in terms of that, as we've been doing that for forever.
Maddie, you want to introduce yourself? And then after everybody introduces themselves, then we can just get started on the presentation.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie Chera. I work with What Chefs Want. I'm actually in our local food program, so that's really where my background is focused, in working in local food systems for many years. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. Right now, I'm in Vincennes, Indiana for a Purdue field day, so I've already had a pretty full day already, but this is my first time joining this working group, so I'm really excited to learn more about the group and hopefully, continue to be connected. What Chefs Want is a wholesale distributor that does have a full service local focused program, as well as we do everything else broadline across all the categories. We're in 12 states, but we're based in Louisville, Kentucky, and have a presence in several states that I think would be considered Central Appalachia. And there's a lot more I could say, and I will say more, but I'll leave it there for now.
Adam Pendleton, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Adam Pendleton. I'm with ASD. Specifically, I work at our food hub Appalachian Harvest, which is in Duffield, Virginia. We mainly handle produce. Historically, we've sold mainly to wholesale customers. Ventured outside of that and tried some different markets over the years. But yeah, so we work directly with growers, about 30 or 35 producers, and then on the produce side, and we've started handling beef and some other items as well.
Great, thank you all. Jonathan, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Are there questions, or what would you like me to address?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking you were just going to do a presentation, but if not, then would you like to just share like what you do from a distribution standpoint, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Sure.
That would be great.
And maybe a little bit about the history of your growth too, Jonathan, because
Sure.
I think your longevity, as you identified as a survivor earlier, you've had a lot of twists and turns with delivery and
distribution. We don't have enough time for that, Leslie.
I know, but come on.
Are most of the folks on here producers that are watching this? Like, I think I asked Adam this, but are they mostly folks who have brands, who are looking to like grow brands? Is that who I'm speaking to?
It's a lot of nonprofits that are working with food and farm businesses, Jonathan.
Okay. All right, That's super helpful to
So it's a
understand.
mix, but
Okay.
I would say it's primarily those of us who are trying to lift the food systems within our regions.
Perfect. That's super
I,
helpful to understand. Thank you.
I think I would also say though, we here at Craft often send these to our technical assistance clients, who are often food producers or small processors, that sort of thing, because those folks often, need this sort of information as well. So,
So it sounds like the folks I'm mostly speaking to are folks that are going to be smaller, starting up, or emerging brands, so to speak, as opposed to more established companies. Because at that point, they probably have already been through the ringer and know what they're know what they're dealing with. So for companies like that, well, let's start with a high level. There's in the distribution model of food in the United States, there's two large ones. There's UNFI and there's Katie, and those are the giants in the marketplace. And I strongly recommend to anybody getting started to avoid those at all costs. Those are companies that will kill you 6 ways to Sunday in ways that you didn't even know were possible. And it's not necessarily your fault or their fault. It's just the way that the business model is built, and they're built around volume, a lot of volume, and it can take a long time to make money on that. So if you have any clients or anybody coming to you, you get a chain. Let's say I was at a fancy food show, and Winn-Dixie came up to the buyer for Winn-Dixie came up, with like 500 stores or whatever, came up to our booth and was like, "We're interested in your whatever." And then they were with the UNFI rep. And while she was looking at the salad dressings or whatever, the rep leaned over and said, "Free fill?" And I was like, "Nope." Meaning I'm not giving you free product to get in the state. He said, well, they grabbed the buyer and just yanked her away to to the next thing. So, I mean, you got to know what you're willing to do and not willing to do, but also understand that playing at that level is extremely expensive. I mean, we had a customer last year that was in their 5th year. They just hit the national stage. They started small, like a lot of folks, and just built it up with independent stores and more farmers markets, and just kept growing and got to the point where they were getting national attention. They got into Target, they got into Sprouts, they got into a lot of these places, but then they discovered it was extremely expensive to play on that level, and went out and tried to raise $2 million, which is really what you need to play on a national level as a brand if you want to do it seriously, and couldn't find investors and ended up closing, which is unfortunate for us as much as it was for them as a co-packer. But that's sort of the story to be aware of. However, so putting that aside, for most people on here, what you'll be mostly dealing with when you get into the world of distribution, beyond a wholesale direct program, and I could speak about that if anyone wants to hear about that, but is working with regional distributors, like what Chefs Want is an example of one, or La Prairie or Rainforest, or there's a number of smaller regional distributors out there that aren't giants and that will not take you to the cleaners in terms of what it takes to work with them. But my number one piece of advice for anybody doing anything with distribution is always read the contract, every single line of the contract. That was my mistake with UNFI way back when. I just flipped to page 806 or whatever, and signed my name, and away went my soul and my firstborn and a lot of other things, So, so anyway, distribution is a good way to grow if you could find the right partner and they understand. The number one question distributors are going to be asking vendors. So for those of you helping emerging companies, before you even introduce them to a distributor, the core question, and Maddie can correct me if I'm wrong about this, is that what they're really wondering is, can you supply enough? Right? Like if you're a small startup or whatever, and they're going to get you into 30 Whole Food stores, is that going to be something where they're going to be distributors going to be pulling their hair out trying to get the order done in 6 weeks and a reorder done in another 4 weeks and constant drama and blah, blah, blah? Or are you going to be able to do that without any issue? So that's the thing, if you start talking to a distributor, really being clear about what your volume capacity is right up front and how you can handle orders up to size X and that sort of thing, and being transparent about that will make the road a lot smoother for everybody. Am I wrong about that, Maddie? I see you're shaking your head.
That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, so when you're getting into distribution, that's definitely something to be keeping in mind. Getting into distributors is usually not the way the process works. You don't generally start with a distributor. What generally brands will do is start with getting stores on their own, getting placements on their own within a region of a distributor. And then at that point, get 40, 50, 60, whatever stores that you're regularly doing a direct wholesale program to. And then you go to somebody like What Chefs Want and say, would you like my store list and take over my distribution? And then they come back and they say, well, we'll take all of these and you can keep a few we don't distribute to or whatever. But the point is, if you come to them with a active list of accounts already buying your product, it's a much easier conversation. Going to a distributor with no distribution whatsoever, you're going to get almost definitely 100% of the time, you're not going to hear anything from anybody, because it's just not, unless it's something it's really weirdly unique and they happen to be searching for that one weirdly unique thing, and that does happen occasionally, but generally speaking, it's not the way it works. So you have to start scrappy. You got to build a customer base. It takes time. This is a get rich slow business. I tell people, like, really slow. So don't expect to, be retiring in 2 years or 3 years or 10 years or whatever, but you got to have patience and energy to build it up. You got to build up your wholesale business. You can do it yourself. I hired somebody early on to make calls. We started with the Hills Market in Columbus, one store, and from there we're now in, I don't know, 600 or 700 stores across the country on a direct, wholesale. But that's because somebody just sat there and worked the phones all day long, just calling, and getting placements and direct orders. And then we would ship, directly to the store and build up. And we still do a ton of business that way. And that's great business because that's the highest margin business. No offense to Maddie and the distributors, but that's you're getting you're getting that extra 25% that you discount when you give a distributor price list out to folks. I could talk about this for hours, but I think it'd be better to see if there are any specific questions or areas that would be helpful for the folks listening, including the folks on the screen and anybody in the chat rooms here to hear.
So I think, Jonathan, could you just talk about, it depends, wholesale direct is different from choosing then it's sort of like matchmaking. Who is the right distributor for me, especially as I might be entering maybe some newer, larger chain opportunities. So how do you do that kind of matchmaking and maybe saying, okay, I really want to expand into this territory with Sprouts or Fresh Time or all the ups and downs many of us have experienced with Whole Foods, especially since they were, acquired by Amazon. So how do you do, I guess, that internal research so you feel like you're making better decisions as to who to date for distribution?
Well, that's actually a really good question, because the only way you have control over your retail price is who you sell to, right? What your price is to distributors or wholesalers, it has to be the same to everybody, right? Or you're breaking the law. But what they mark it up, what their margin is and what the store's margin is varies significantly. So if you're wanting to sell to Whole Foods and you're going through What Chefs Want, Whole Foods is going to have a higher margin. If you're going to be going to, more of a grocery store through more of a traditional distributor, you're going to get a lower probably shelf price at the end of the day. So there's a lot of variability in that. But at the end of the day, if the way to actually get into a distributor is to get into a chain. So for example, Leslie, let's talk about Heinen's and our history with Heinen's. So for my first 8 years, we tried to get into the Heinen's chain in Chicago, and as a local brand, and they said they were all about local, and we just kept getting shut out, and nobody would listen to us, and finally Leslie was at some conference up in Cleveland and was with one of the Heinen brothers or something, I think, right? And she basically chewed their ass off about them saying they supported local, and here's a brand that had been knocking at their door for 8 years, and what the hell, sort of thing. And wouldn't you know it, that guy turned around and overruled his buyer and brought us in, and we're still in now 15 years later. So sometimes it takes something like that, but the point is you've got to get somebody at the chain to be willing to bring you in. And when that happens, to answer Leslie's question, they will tell you who they want to distribute with, but that does not have to be the final answer. So if they say, we want to bring you in with UNFI, alarm bells, you should say, great. Who are some of your secondary distributors? Because we would prefer to work with somebody that's more to our scale. And of course, they'll have these places will have 3 or 4 distributors usually. Now Whole Foods is exclusive with UNFI, who's doing only 8% margin, which is insane, which is why their fees they make all the fees chargebacks to manufacturers because they have to make up the margin they're losing on that Whole Foods business. So Whole Foods is dictating terms to to Whole Foods and dictating terms to UNFI. Sorry. But my point is when you talk to a chain or a buyer and you say who'd you like to distribute, their first choice is going to be whoever they like the best, right? But that's not always, say who else could we talk to? Who else could you introduce us to? And like instead of UNFI, maybe they use What Chefs Want, or they use La Prairie, or they use whatever. And then you can ask around, find out which of those is going to be the better fit for you, and then ask them to do an introduction. At that point, if the chain wants you, they'll put you in. I mean, so it's the distributor doesn't really get a choice, to be honest. At the end of the day, it's between you and the distributor to negotiate the terms of your contract and whatnot. But if you get a chain to say yes, then you're in. It's just who are you in with, and that's where you do have some choice. Did that answer the question adequately, Leslie? Okay.
We had a question in the chat from Brandon. He says, Jonathan, did you develop your DSD list by owning your own wheels or third-party cross-dock, both, or now it sounds like you used UPS, etc.?
Oh yeah, no, we never drove anything anywhere. Although occasionally we might have done some deliveries in Columbus in early because it was an hour, 2 hours before the bypass. But it was we would go up there all the time. And I was demoing constantly. In my early years, I was in Columbus every single weekend. I would walk into the Giant Eagle in Market District, one of the stores. I had to the point where I could just walk in, set up a table by the meat counter, greet the guy by name. I never even checked in up front. It's just I was there all the time. Like they're like, oh yeah, it's him again, sort of thing. And that's sort of the effort that it takes at the beginning to build the business and show the movement, of things. But no, everything was done by UPS, FedEx, whatever, and shipping is expected as an extra cost by the store. So you don't pay that. You can do shipping discounts if you want to do a promotional campaign, but all the direct stores expect it to be, the cost of the product plus the cost of the shipping. That's just normal. So don't feel guilty about, charging shipping to clients. And if you have heavy stuff, we do condiments, pasta sauces, salsas, barbecue, it's heavy. So occasionally we get, some, especially when we're shipping like out west, we get some gripes about the freight costs. And I'm like, I can't help what freight costs. It is what it is. It's just, and stores that work independently are very, very used to building that freight into their pricing.
Great. Thank you. That was really great. Maybe we can move on to Maddie now, and then Adam, and then at the end, I thought we could have more Q&A. I'm sure more questions will come up.
Great. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
No. Yes? Okay, great. But I want to see a different screen, so hold on one second. You'll let me just make sure this is correct. Okay, great. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me. I don't think I mentioned this, but I'm actually new to working in distribution. I have only been with What Chefs Want for about 4 months. So everything that Jonathan said about us is true, and about the field as I know it is true, but this is actually a really great opportunity for me to do some peer learning as well. And so I'm kind of coming from a similar position to probably some of the folks that are listening or watching this later. But I am not new to regional food systems. I've been working in food for about 16 or more years. And right now my role is local food specialist focused on grants and partnerships, like I said, on the local team at What Chefs Want. And I'm in the general area that we're talking about. I was also curious, and Jonathan kind of beat me to it, of like knowing more about the group and who's here. So we got a little bit of an answer to that, but I was wondering if since I'm new to the working group, like, are there specific goals that this group has around distribution, or maybe people who are in the audience, if you have specific things that you're trying to do, you can either chime in or put it in the chat. But any of our hosts, if you have anything to weigh in terms of like, what is the group trying to achieve overall, that might be helpful for us to know and discuss too.
Well, mostly, and others can chime in, but we know that distribution can make or break your ability to succeed. And in rural areas in particular, it can be problematic. And so we decided over the years, we've had different goals. For 2025, what we really wanted to do is just educate. And so it's not just around distribution, because obviously that's something critical and why we're talking about it today, but it's also about marketing, like Jonathan touched on that. I mean, it's you got to do everything at once, but infrastructure is critical, and so this is really just more generally about infrastructure.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, and if anyone else, okay, someone had to go. Okay, I was just checking the chat. Awesome. Okay, well that does help kind of understand the big picture. And I wasn't sure today if we wanted to do like an overview of what is distribution. So I pulled together a couple just kind of overview slides, but we can kind of move through quickly because I want to speak to some of the things that are specific about what I know best about the field, which is the company I work for. And that might feed into some of their questions and discussion. But in general, there's different kinds of distribution. You know, you can do direct to consumer, you could go right to the consumer yourself, farmers markets, you could go direct to the retail outlet, or you could work with a wholesale distributor like a regional distributor like us. There's also lots of in-between categories. Some things, you know, one might want to consider the differences between different models in terms of cost and the pricing structure, like Jonathan mentioned, the market reach, you know, so not only is a distributor going to ask, can you meet the market demand, but you want to ask the distributor, like, what is your market and how far do we have the capacity to grow our distribution and our reach. Infrastructure needs, like Kathleen, you just said, and you know, risk and scalability, which is important for any business consideration. When you think about distribution, some of the big things that go into helping determine how much it costs are transportation, labor, cold storage, and packaging. And then kind of Jonathan talked a little bit about different strategies and best practices around pricing and what the margin will be for every time you add on a layer to the supply chain, there's another cut, right? So thinking about that, and in a lot of cases it can be worth it because at least speaking from the What Chefs Want perspective, we do offer those logistical components, and that transportation, the labor, the cold storage, a lot of those things are things that a food business or farmer might not want to or cannot take on themselves, or maybe they were doing it and now they want to scale up. Jonathan, do you want to chime in?
Can I just add one thing really quick?
Yeah.
In this, one thing I think a lot of people don't understand, and I've talked classes at Fancy Food about this, but in this business, we talk margins and not markup. And the difference is division versus multiplication. So when you're doing margins, it's a formula by division. It's not a formula by, you don't just multiply by 1.25. So I have a margin calculator that I share with clients. That's in a simple Excel where you can just plug in your cost of goods, and, you know, and margins are very public. You can ask the distributor right up front, what's your margin? What's the source margin? And then you plug it in, bing, bang, boom, it tells you what your retail is going to be. And then you can work backwards from there and see if you need to like improve your COGS in order to get a better retail, or if you can live with that retail, that sort of thing. So if anybody wants that sheet, feel free to, Leslie, if you don't have my email, Leslie does. Feel free to reach out and I'm happy to share that. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, because some of this I know in general terms and the specific examples is really helpful. So some of the other questions, you know, we touched on a few of these already with Jonathan's overview, but you know, things you might want to ask: what markets is a distributor serving? What are those volume requirements and can I meet them? Do they offer the marketing and branding support that I might need or want, or do I want to control more of that? You know, what are the rules around quality control, food safety, any other requirements? Can they share, you know, examples of successful partnerships, especially in rural areas, if that's, you know, concern? And this was one that my boss shared when I was kind of telling her I was going to come talk to you today. She was like, you know, can you leverage the existing resources and systems as much as possible? And I think that's one of the real big benefits of working with a network or with a regional distributor or just any sort of distributor at all, is it's tapping into some of these systems that are already set up. Maybe they're not always perfect, but there are some opportunities that you could use things that already exist. So to that point, I think it ultimately comes down to finding the right people to do business with. So really kind of looking not only at the business case, but also how they do business and whether there's values alignment and transparency. And, you know, like Jonathan said, most people will share the information that you're seeking, but if there's any sort of you're getting a sense that they're not sharing and not transparent, then that's not a good sign. And there's also, I think, a lot of opportunity to do collaboration and experiment and tweak things in this field, especially when you're working with a smaller or more regional producer like what Chefs Want or some of the other people on the call. So I think that that can be another thing to look at. So since I wasn't exactly sure what this session would be like, I asked our marketing team, like, hey, do we have like a general deck about the company? And so I have a bunch of slides that I'm gonna kind of just go through quickly, but I wanted to tell you a few things about the local program as well, just because I think that will be most relevant for this group. But just to give you a sense of what Chefs Want and who we are, we have cool videos. I'm not going to show you the whole video, but we started in Louisville, like I said, and we've been on a many decades journey to where we are now, where we have 3 main regional hubs in 3 different regions. We kind of have the central region, which the central Appalachian area is mostly in, and then we also are in the Southeast and now in the Rockies. And we have probably over 400 distribution trucks now, because this is a little bit older of a slide. Here's kind of a sense of our distribution coverage. And we, like I said, a lot of our bread and butter is produce, but we cover all categories of products. And we actually have like different lines and different programs for different types of products. We also have a prep kitchen. So we do like prepared or like cut produce, for example, for school lunch programs, things like that. Some of the things that set our company apart is we offer split cases and no minimums for customer partners. Daily delivery, I think it's at least 6 to 7 days a week. We have 24/7 customer support, and it's not only, you know, local and specialty stuff, but also broadline and all these other things. We have some special programs, local food connection being one. We also do seafood, and I mentioned the prep kitchen. Let me move ahead a little bit because we are getting a little repetitive. Gotta edit some of these slides down. But getting into kind of the local program, which I just want to speak about for a few minutes, because I think it's, again, probably the most salient aspect and the part that I know the best. So what Chefs Want is a regional wholesale distributor, but we also feel really strongly about supporting agricultural systems. And so that has been kind of a running theme through our business since the beginning. But about in 2015, so about 10 years ago, this smaller regional food hub called Local Food Connection was established in Kentucky. It serves sort of the northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, southeastern Indiana area, and eventually it grew and it became part of what Chefs Want. And now it's across the whole company rather than just a small regional program, but we kind of work in different regions. So we still have that local regional focus, but it's across the company. And really what we're focused on is being a distribution solution for customers and vendors who really care about where the food is coming from, really prioritize being able to tell that story, whether you're the chef or the owner or the vendor, you know, the food business or farmer, to tell that story. And that's kind of who we focus on working with. a lot of small and medium-sized farms and food businesses. We also work with a lot of partners, so like AceNet and regional food business centers, and I'm at Purdue Extension today, so we work with a lot of those other nonprofits, like many on the call, to really expand our network and grow sales opportunities together, innovate with different opportunities that might come up to do a pilot project or explore a new product category. Like I said, we do all different categories, even within local. So we have dairy and eggs and cheese and gourmet products and meat, as well as local produce. Our name, What Chefs Want, sometimes confuses people. They think we're only doing independent restaurants, but actually we are across many different market channels, including restaurants, but also some direct-to-consumer outlets, colleges and universities, big institutions like healthcare, hospitals, partner managed food service, so like corporate restaurants or anywhere there's like Aramark or Sodexo, a lot of school districts, and we even partner with government agencies. So some of you might be familiar with the local food for schools and the local food purchase. I always forget what the last letters stand for, cooperative agreement, that just ended in a lot of the states or is ending now. And through that, we were able to buy a lot of local product and move it out into communities through schools and food banks. So we're in all of those areas. And as I mentioned, we started as a food hub, and now we've really grown. We act as a resource, a solution, and a partner, and really try to work on both really being that tie, like what you would think in a best case scenario of a distributor being the middleman. We want to help the producers and the customers. So we're really values driven, local as well as other values. We prioritize education both for our vendors and for our customers and for our partners. So here today for that reason. And then we also really prioritize that traceability and transparency. So not only for the purposes of being able to communicate the impact and the storytelling component of local food, but also to be able to assure food safety and quality of the food, which is, we know, more and more important. So I have a couple other slides that I think I could share if it comes up in Q&A, but we've basically given presentations to vendors in the past, and I think we might have one coming up with AceNet in the next month or so, about how we work with different types of farms and food businesses, because kind of as Jonathan said, we need to be able to ensure some volume, but a lot of the specifics of a distribution agreement will depend on like what you have, where you want to sell it, and for what price, and how, what quantity. So we work with all different we work with some farmers that are selling local cucumbers at the height of the season for the same price as commodity cucumber, non-local, but they're selling in huge volume and they're okay with that. And then we have a very, very specialty niche product that maybe you're selling in like a 2-pack for top dollar to a very specific, restaurant. So we work with all different kinds of folks with all different kinds of situations. And I promise I'm going to stop talking in 1 second, but I wanted to just share a couple other recent wins that might be relevant or kind of get ideas flowing from the audience. I mentioned our partnerships. So the local food for schools that I mentioned was a USDA program we just wrapped. For example, in Kentucky, we were able to move a ton of local food from vendors in Kentucky and Indiana and Ohio through that program into Kentucky schools. We did the same in Ohio with and in Kentucky with food banks. And then we also have a program in Ohio that we'd be interested in exploring with other partners, but they're doing a cost share. We're part of a program that's offering a cost share for food safety third-party audit. And that's a really great way to get small vendors into the distribution system. And so we're partnering with with different organizations to kind of support our vendors in expanding and meeting those demands of distribution in a way that I think is sort of unique and it's rare, let's say that. We're also partnering with other organizations to build out infrastructure for processing, for developing other projects. And we're doing some of that marketing work that kind of has come up a couple of times already. So we have a really cool thing that we're trying to offer in all the states that we serve. But right now we have guides for Kentucky and Ohio for this year about all the local food offerings that we have and all the different vendors that we have to kind of share and get people excited about what's happening. So that's just one example of some of the marketing work that we do. So I will stop there because I think I've been going for a little long and see if we have any other follow-up questions.
I think maybe what we'll do, if it's okay, is go to Adam Pendleton and then save questions to the end just to make sure that we have enough time to hear from everyone. So Adam, if you want to take it away.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I'm with ASD, specifically Appalachian Harvest, the food hub here in Duffield. As a whole, our work falls into a few different buckets: workforce development, ag education, food access, economic development, and then resource management. The food hub here in Duffield was built at this location since 2008, 8. Which one's right, Kathleen? 8. I think you started operating out of here. Yeah. But started in 2001, just across the mountain here. Started out as only produce. I guess about midway through since I've been here, so probably like 5 or 6 years ago, brought on some value added items. The thought behind that was to try to incorporate some of the second products that producers was seeing, be able to use those to give them an extra source of income. And then about 2 years ago, we started working with beef to try to help out some of the beef producers in the area. By far the largest type of farming that's going on here, relatively close to us. So seen a pretty big gap there and wanted to try and see if we could offer something similar to what we had been offering to the produce growers for several years. I guess to talk a little bit about their distribution and the types of markets we serve and have served. Currently, we have 2 tractor and trailers, 53-foot reefers, and then we have 2 different size box trucks. One will hold 10 pallets and the other one will hold 6 to 8, depending on how you load it. Historically, we've mainly done direct into distribution centers with wholesale produce. I've just kind of listed out some pros that we've seen and some cons to working with each of these different types of buyers. For us, the large orders going into distribution centers is really nice. Single drops normally. So rather than dropping off at a bunch of different store locations, you're taking half a tractor and trailer in and you're able to drop that all off at one point. Typically it's a full pallet of the same product. Sometimes, you may even be looking at a full tractor and trailer, which would be up to about 28 pallets of one product. Having that bigger truck also allows the ability, it can be done in a box truck, but there's more options with the larger trailer for backhauls, which we've used a lot in the past. Because of the routes now, we don't get to as much, but it opened up the ability for us to do some backhauling. So some freight loads that was coming back to other food processors or different types of manufacturers here close to us. And we was able to do that and offset the cost of traveling down to deliver those products to customers. So that's something that, again, it's kind of limited from my experience in a box truck, but if you're in the tractor and trailers, there's a pretty wide variety of options on products you could haul back and get you closer to home and cut down on some of those costs. For us, and this probably wouldn't be true for everybody, but we're located in Duffield, Virginia, which is basically in the middle of nowhere. We're not really close to an interstate. I guess we're 45 minutes from hitting the interstate from here. So for us, I guess one of the challenges that we've run into with trying to get to distribution centers is we're typically a pretty good distance away from those. So having to travel a pretty good way. pricing can be really tough. So with wholesale, typically, especially going into, larger customers, they're going to demand your best product, and they're probably going to pay you less than most of the other customers would. But you may, again, be able to move a tractor and trailer load of it at the drop of a hat. So it's, it just kind of depends on where you're at in production and, what you're really looking for. And like Jonathan mentioned earlier, you kind of have to figure out what fits best with you without, running yourself out of business. We've worked with some small grocery chains too. The pros that we've seen with that, normally the pricing's better. Typically, it seems like they're not as picky on quality. I have my opinion on why that is. I assume because it's typically going on the shelf, within an hour or two of you leaving the store and dropping it off, as to where, if you're going into a distribution center, it's probably going to have to be able to hold and travel for a couple more days to actually get out to the store and see that opportunity to reach the shelf. So that's definitely something that's a benefit to working with some smaller, more local stores. The cons that we've seen, again, we're not located in a great spot here where we're at, but for the stores we were serving, it was about an hour and a half deadhead, just to reach kind of where the cluster of stores was. So it was, again, a pretty good little drive, especially when you're in a box truck and the amount of time that added. Typically, the orders were pretty small, and a lot of stops. So if you're just traveling a decent distance, again, that kind of eats into your profit pretty quickly. And then most of these were done in the box truck, so we was kind of limited on the opportunities for the back calls, especially with the areas that we was serving in that capacity. And then we've also served some, which I think I heard you say that What Shelves Want had too, but some school systems. The pros with that, again, was like pricing was pretty nice. Quality, they weren't extremely picky on, as long as, they were willing to work with you on something that may be misshapen or a little large or a little small. They still needed a product that was going to hold up and last. Just the good feeling of being able to get local product into kids that was close to home and it'd be fresh, and, them eating, and a lot of times something that they may not have otherwise. And then the cons on that side of it, again, multiple stops, usually small orders in their experience. Normally they were pretty picky on us about wanting the product to be delivered early in the week. And that was just to allow them time to try to use it before that weekend, as to where if it was a grocery store, that's probably one of the bigger rushes they have is the weekend crowd. With the school system, obviously they're not there. So that kind of makes for a problem with them if they're having to try to hold a lot of stuff over the weekend. And then another thing, it kind of goes back to the travel. Schools around here are pretty good ways apart. And they usually want to have the cafeteria staff out by about 1 or 2 p.m., which means they have a cutoff time on deliveries of 1 or 2 p.m. And it makes it pretty difficult to get around to many of those in a day, especially with the distance between the counties. And then again, this may be more of a localized problem. I'm not 100% sure, but the products they would take from us was pretty limited. Most of the schools had a lot of trouble with a shortage of staff. So if it was something that required a lot of manual labor and processing, then it didn't really work out for them. They really enjoyed the fruit, the strawberries, tomatoes, apples, things that they could just put on the tray and not have a lot of prep time tied up. And those were probably some of our best sellers when talking about just the school systems. So the differences, I guess we'll talk a little bit about the differences in palletizing the loads depending on the market and their experiences. I mentioned it with the wholesale specifically, but full pallets of the same product, it's easier to handle, less labor on the warehouse side of it. So you're pulling a whole pallet, wrapping it, shipping it out. As for the smaller grocery stores and the schools, they're pretty similar. It takes longer to pull those loads together. A lot of times you're pulling a couple boxes off the pallet and kind of having to build that specific to them. Also, another challenge for us when specifically looking at those smaller accounts, our system that we ship out of, it's really geared towards more of the wholesale side of things as far as how it functions and works. So it made it a little more difficult for us to to operate that system. Pretty time consuming when we was doing it with the smaller loads. And we did have some struggles, especially early on, with accuracy and just all the things that came along with trying to pull, a couple cases of this, a couple cases of that, maybe even splitting one in half. I think I heard mentioned earlier, just to kind of satisfy that customer's needs. So that was probably the biggest challenges that we seen on the smaller side of things. Again, I think it just kind of, not to say that one market's a better one to serve than the next. I think it really just comes down to how you're set up at your facility and software you're using, what your plan is for that. But I would definitely say, from their experience, it's going to require more labor when you're serving those smaller accounts that you have more manual labor time tied up in. Then I mentioned it, but yeah, just on the wholesale, for the large side of wholesales, they're going to want your top quality, but they'll take a lot of volume typically on the lower end of the pricing scale. That was a downside there. Another thing to think about when going into wholesale markets, with distribution centers, a lot of times you never really know what you're going to run into when you're delivering there. Unfortunately, they may get you in and out in an hour, or you might have to sit on a dock for 5 or 6 hours. So just something to kind of keep in mind and build into your delivery route as you learn those customers. If you're trying to mesh docks up back to back with a couple deliveries in a day, it's just something to keep in mind on how quick you can get in and out of a particular site, because they do vary quite a bit depending on the customer you're delivering to. Believe that is all I've got.
Alrighty. We have a couple of questions in the chat. One is for Jonathan specifically, and then one is for kind of everybody. So I'm going to ask the Jonathan question and then the panel question, and we'll try and wrap up right on time. It says for Jonathan, when you started your foray into wholesale distribution, did you have challenges finding distributors who are willing to come down to Southeast Ohio? And if so, how did this impact your approach working with distributors going forward?
No, the location was never the issue. I mean, a distributor generally will do an FOB pickup. So they'll come to your place and pick it up, or you'll provide them a delivered price and make sure you specify pallet minimum or something like that. So they're not, giving them a delivered price on one, jar of product or one case of product. But no, the location, I mean, obviously you want to find distributors who are somewhat in your region at that point, but that wasn't the challenge. The challenge was getting a distributor to agree to carry us in the first place. I did the things backwards. When I got my first distributor, I called Avenue Gourmet, which is not around anymore. Way back in the day, I called Patricia over there like every week for 8 months until she finally wore her down, and she's like, fine, I'll get you in, And then we got into Whole Foods, the old Whole Foods, the good Whole Foods, for a year, and then we got discontinued, and that was the first heartbreak I had as a brand, and went through all of that. So, but it's that sort of persistence. So it's not, the location really didn't have anything to do with it. And then with a lot of the transportation upgrades that have happened around here in the last 10 years, I tell a lot of our clients that we're now within that 10-hour drive of 80% of the U.S. population, which is true. So that's a really helpful thing for people to be aware of. So don't try to go selling on the West Coast like I stupidly did in my early years, and focus on where all the customers actually are, which are in your backyard, and build out from there.
Thank you. All right, this one's for everyone. So if each of you have a minute or two to speak to this. Leslie asked, from your point of view, what should nonprofit staff be doing to prepare farmers and processors to help them identify what they need to have ready prior to thinking about wider delivery or distribution?
One thing that I know is an issue with the small and medium-sized farmers that we work a lot with in the local program for What Chefs Want is the food safety certification or third-party audit. So yeah, exactly. Thank you, Robin. So we require that, and there have been some instances where we've been able to, for like those big government collaboratives, we've been able to kind of have a bridge to GAP, for example, good agricultural practices for produce. But in general, will require that. So at least like having clarity on what's required for different markets or distributors, and then pursuing that would be my advice. And then also kind of developing an understanding of different specs required by different markets. And like, so how is the product packaged? How is it transported? Those kinds of considerations are really helpful. And then I think also being prepared to tell your story and like communicate about your brand and do some of that marketing legwork so that you can hand that off really easily to your partners are a couple of the like easiest recommendations that I would make. And I want to hear what the others have to say.
Yeah, I guess for us, I would second that as well. I definitely think depending on their location, if they've looked into how they may be going to be able to either catch a ride somewhere and meet you to get the product there, so the distribution of it. And then for produce specifically, I think, you know, making sure those producers are ready for the top market that you're trying to get them into. So again, like if it's wholesale, you know, they kind of got to have their ducks in a row as far as grading and the standards they're going to have to meet on that. So, you know, just trying to make sure to not throw them into a field that they're not ready to play in.
Robin had a couple of comments in the chat about an on-site seconds market, like Earth's Fair Deli and Salad Bar. Um, I I think I would second that. You know, one of the problems that producers have here in southwestern Pennsylvania is that they don't really have a seconds market, and there hasn't really been a lot of development of that on site. So a lot of that just becomes waste, right? And that's a big issue. So I think that's a good thing to figure out. And Maddie said in the chat that nonprofit partners can also help develop customers so the food business can bring those customers into the distributor, like Jonathan said. So that's pretty great. Does anyone have any final remarks, Kathleen, Leslie, or any of our panelists?
Well, I just want to thank all of you. This has been really informative and helpful. You know, I've been doing this for a long time and I learn something new every time. So it's always great to hear from folks doing different types of things. So we just really appreciate y'all taking the time and sharing your wisdom. And Jonathan, thanks for sharing the margin tool. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Just keep in mind it doesn't include freight. So that's something you have to think about when you're punching in numbers there.
All right, folks, this panel was recorded. It will be up on the Appalachia Regional Food Business Center YouTube, probably within the next week. Thank you again to all of our panelists. We will be sending out, Jonathan shared some of the resources that he has developed, so we will be sending those out as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.